there was a representation of extremely wealthy students of color on my campus who did not diversify the socioeconomic experience or the class experience at all whatsoever, who were unbelievably wealthy students who ended up, in the affirmative action model as it stood at the time, being representative of a minority community, when I'm sure that it's much more advantageous for Harvard to pick the extremely wealthy Black student from a prep school than the extremely promising valedictorian from an inner city whose parents might not necessarily donate to the school. Like, I really feel like affirmative action, at least from my standpoint, and coming from like an elite institution and watching people go into the next one, really benefited or failed to benefit the people from genuinely disadvantaged backgrounds that race was supposed to be a proxy for.
Right, that's a well-documented phenomenon. It's not just your observation, the data bears it out. If any folks want to look it up, it was noted at Harvard by Henry Louis Gates and Lonnie Guinier, a law professor. And they noted that the students of color were overwhelmingly immigrants, not overwhelmingly international students. Sorry, not immigrants. But the idea is basically what you're saying is that they were people, affluent students of color who had the ability to pay. The number of socioeconomically disadvantaged students of color who end up at these places who aren't a recruited athlete is infinitesimal.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. And theoretically, affirmative action was meant to, distribute privilege and opportunity more equitably across society, and it ended up becoming something, I think, that until the discovery of this case, I don't feel like the general public was aware of just how much that was being abused. I mean, I'm very much a believer that diversity of socioeconomic experience is probably a more meaningful proxy for diversifying a student body. And I would be hugely in favor of, and I don't think it would be unconstitutional at all, as racial affirmative action is, of a socioeconomic affirmative action at some of these schools, to make sure it's not just kids on full tuition, full ride scholarships, and people who are paying full tuition, and then nobody in between who maybe can afford something that doesn't qualify for a certain program or scholarship. But I think a socioeconomic affirmative action would be a great solution to what these schools should be doing. Perhaps it's not as profitable for them.
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's ever a solution, right? But it would help a lot, partial solution. But what's incredible is, constitutionally, there's nothing in SFFA versus Harvard which would preclude a college from giving tips to people based on socioeconomic disadvantage. Gorsuch basically talks about it talked about it during oral argument, and none of them have done it.
Yeah.
Right. So why, if they were so committed to diversity, whatever their particular conception of diversity is, why have none of these schools said, okay, we don't think socioeconomic status is as good as race, but it's an imperfect proxy and it's constitutional. Now, I guess one dilemma they could have would be if they said they were doing socioeconomic tips for the purpose of improving race diversity, that might be unconstitutional. But nothing would stop them from saying what you just said, which is, we think this is an incredibly important type of diversity, and I think the Supreme Court would tolerate it. And
it would accomplish the same ends in a way with just a different. I mean, I think that would disproportionately, unfortunately, as a fact of the history and current economic distribution of our country, that would disproportionately benefit applicants of color from disadvantaged backgrounds, which I think is a great thing, because that should be what we're trying to get represented in our elite institutions. And instead you have prep school kids who might look a certain way but not share any meaningful experiences with a large swath of the country. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know Harvard can fill their freshman class dozens of times over with equally achieving valedictorians.
Yeah, they always make that joke. They turn down, 4 out of 5 valedictorians or whatever like that. I completely agree.
And what is your feeling about this recent kind of war on standardized tests, and particularly through the guise that has some racial element, or
Yeah, I think it's crap. I mean, you know, everybody knows that standardized tests are, you know, highly correlated with income, right? And so you briefly had a move where weren't requiring tests and looking to other metrics of access, and now they're going back to it and, you know, put out some data saying, and this is also from the Friedman and Chetty team, but saying that standardized tests are actually some or measures of skills and sort of outcome in college. Okay, so you're